Well, Eileen did it. She has become an Olympic champion and brought a prestigious gold medal to the People's Republic of China. However, this is where things start to get interesting, as inevitably there was going to be some major criticism going towards Eileen. Even before she won the gold medal, Fox News reporters Tucker Carlson and Will Kane described Eileen as ungrateful for betraying and turning her back to the country that raised her, and calling her decision to represent China shameful. Now, last week I debuted a video detailing the real reason Eileen Gu is representing China at the Winter Olympics. But in today's video, I would like to elaborate further and talk about what it truly means to be an Olympian, and why Eileen's decision to represent China was actually more difficult, more risky, and a lot more pressure than if she had stayed with Team USA. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. The first 1,000 people to use the link down in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare's premium service. The story of Eileen is fascinating. She started skiing at 3 years old and joined a ski team at age 8. Even as a young American girl learning skiing in California, Eileen noticed most girls were encouraged to participate in downhill racing, while the boys were recruited for freestyle skiing. At this moment, Eileen knew she wanted to compete against the boys, and in the future inspire a new generation of female athletes. Last year, while preparing for these very Olympic Games, Eileen stated, "The most important thing in life for me is to find something you like to do and enjoy it. The second most important thing is to change the world." As most of us know by now, Eileen is mixed race. Her father Caucasian and her mother a Chinese native originally from Beijing. But what's important to note is that we know very little about Eileen's father. The New York Times stated that he graduated from Harvard University, but he is completely out of the public eye, and Eileen has never publicly spoken about him. Eileen was raised by her mother and maternal grandmother, and even Eileen's last name, Gu, represents her mother's Chinese heritage. Once you start to understand a little bit more about this family dynamic, you can begin to understand her deep connection to China. Now, many people have speculated that Eileen's choice to represent China was financially motivated. Eileen is an accomplished fashion model and already has lucrative contracts with Louis Vuitton, Tiffany, and many other companies. Now that she has won gold, will this lead to more endorsement contracts for Eileen in China? Absolutely it will, but athletes seeking sponsorship deals is an important part of the sport. To better understand this dynamic, listen to this quote from 4-time Olympian Elena Myers-Taylor. "My husband and I and hundreds of others wear Team USA uniforms, so people assume that the US government funds us. Not so. Most American Olympians work full-time or part-time in addition to their Olympic training, and we all depend on companies to pay for training, equipment, and competition fees." Here is an interesting fact that most people don't know. Unlike most other nations, the United States government does not have a Ministry of Sport and does not fund its Olympic Committee. As a result, American athletes depend on sponsorship deals to fund their careers. Elena goes on to share, "For my family and many others, sponsor support isn't a bonus or a nice to have. It's a need to have. One example, in 2020, sponsor support enabled me to take time to have a child. If you're a competitive athlete, not competing means not earning prize money. There's no paid paternal leave on the bobsled circuit. Because we saved some of our sponsor funds from the last Olympics, I was able to give birth to my son and take time to recover." Let's be honest here. Eileen had an amazing opportunity to cash in on several lucrative sponsorship opportunities. As someone who has worked in the sports marketing industry for 15 plus years, it comes down to leverage. Eileen can leverage her name and her brand much bigger in China than she can in America. But it's not just about the money. Remember her quote from earlier, her goal is to change the world. Eileen represents both the US and China and often highlights one of her main sporting motivations is to bring her two cultures together and inspire young women in China to try extreme sports. But what about the US? Didn't Eileen become the world-class skier she is today because of the facilities and coaching she received in America? Not necessarily. Being an American Olympian doesn't guarantee you the best access to training or coaches. Let's take the example of American snowboarder Victor Ivan Wilde. Victor originally competed for the United States, but after the 2010 Winter Olympics, the US Ski and Snowboard Federation shut down its alpine snowboarding program. At the time, the program had an annual budget of only $135,000, a fraction of the funding needed for an internationally competitive team. Instead of ending his career, Victor left the country and married a Russian snowboarder in 2011. 3 years later, he went on to win 2 gold medals for Russia, and this was his comments after his win. "Russia is a country that made it possible for me to win. Had I stayed in the US, I'd probably be still sitting at home doing some ordinary job. It is just amazing that I won this gold medal for Russia. Some may think, this guy still stays American, and that is not true. I am not some American guy who decided it would be easier to get to the Olympics in a country where snowboarding is undeveloped. I have chosen the harder path to success, and I have walked it all the way." In my opinion, Eileen's choice to represent China was not the easier path. In fact, it was a much more difficult path to choose. By switching to China, Eileen placed a huge weight on her very own shoulders. She was the #1 story heading into the 2022 Winter Olympics and had the hopes and dreams of 1.4 billion people riding on her performance. For those of you who watched the event live, did you catch how the announcer introduced Eileen at the top of the slope? Eileen Gu, the people's champion. Here is Eileen, standing atop the slope, realizing it was the biggest moment in her entire life, and she rose to the occasion and landed the most difficult trick performed by any woman that day. The pure raw emotion that poured out of Eileen that sunny afternoon in Beijing was unreal. It's what all of us who enjoy sport wants to see. The world's best athletes performing through pressure and delivering a world-class result. You want to talk about inspiring the future of young girls around the world? This was the scene at my house with my family watching the competition in our living room. My 6-year-old daughter turned around and said, "Daddy, she's half American and half Chinese, just like me." Evidence that representing China is not an easy task can easily be seen from what happened to Chinese figure skater Beverly Zhu. Born in California, Beverly also made the decision to represent China instead of her birth country during these games, even changing her name to a Chinese name, Zhu. Unfortunately, Zhu crashed in her debut in the women's short program team event, finishing dead last in the event. The hashtag #ZhuHasFallen received over 200 million views in just a few short hours, with many Chinese fans questioning her qualification and her capability. But targeting young individual athletes and attacking them on social media is going too far. Instead, fans need to be more empathetic and supportive. We should all be proud of our athletes, whether they finish first or last in any competition. This, however, does raise an interesting point, as many Americans are feeling compassion for the figure skater Zhu, but at the same time calling Eileen Gu a traitor. Is there a double standard that exists here? To be honest, I don't think Eileen's decision to represent China is about her as a person as much as it's an opportunity for people to further criticize China. Mark Dreyer, a Beijing-based analyst and author of Sporting Superpower, an insider's view on China's quest to be the best, went on to state, "The narrative in the US on both sides of the political aisle is that China is bad. And so, the fact that someone is specifically willing to leave the US to go to China pushes a lot of buttons. I think if it was the US and almost any other country, possibly with the exception of Russia, it would be a very different reaction." A great example is American-born Sarah Schlepper, who represented Team USA 4 times in the Olympic alpine skiing. In 2014, Sarah acquired Mexican citizenship and is now competing again in Beijing. However, this time, she is representing Mexico. And let's also not forget the Chinese men's hockey team, whose 25-man roster is comprised of 11 Canadians, 7 Americans, 1 Russian, and 6 homegrown Chinese players. One of the stars of the Chinese hockey team is American Jake Chaleos, son of the NHL Hall of Famer Chris Chaleos. When asked for being an American citizen and playing for Team China, Jake responded, "Obviously, I'm not Chinese, but for the last 3 years I've been playing for the Chinese team. I've got the chance to live here, and I love it. In 3 years, you start to feel a certain closeness to the country, and the fact that they're letting me represent their country is a huge honor. Honestly, I couldn't be more excited to represent China." As we come to the conclusion of today's video, I want to end by sharing a fascinating article from Cosmopolitan magazine entitled, "I used to feel guilty rooting for China. Olympian Eileen Gu vindicated me." The author goes on to share her personal story of being born in China and later immigrating to America, where she became a naturalized American citizen. Many people relocate and acquire new citizenships as part of their journey in life, but the connection to the homeland always remains. The author admitted that deep down in her heart, she still loved China and cheered for China instead of America at the Olympics, something that her American friends have judged her on. But there is one important quote that I want you to take away from this article. Identity isn't a matter of foreign policy, it's a matter of the heart. The author goes on to share this incredible message. For immigrants like me and first-generation Americans like Eileen Gu, the China or America ultimatum poses a false dichotomy. This reaffirms the notion that expressing love for one's Chinese culture is akin to signing a blood oath to the CCP, a logical fallacy perpetuated by mainstream media that stokes a vicious cycle of anti-Asian bias and racism, however inadvertent. Eileen Gu is not a pawn in some grand geopolitical strife. She's a young woman who grew up straddling two worlds, a feat that I'll bet is even more complicated than the gravity-defying flips she'll be performing this week. At the end of the day, let's take the geopolitics out of this discussion. Eileen Gu is an 18-year-old woman that gave the Olympics her everything, and she became a world champion. As an American citizen, I don't look at Eileen Gu as a traitor, but rather as a trailblazer, someone who saw an amazing opportunity to inspire hundreds of millions of young women in China by taking on their country's flag, putting it on her back, and challenging herself in the hardest way possible. But I know what some of you are thinking. Eileen Gu could have inspired millions of young girls in China by being an American skier. She didn't have to represent Team China in order to do so. But is that really true? Let me give everybody a perfect example. Last night, American Nathan Chen won the gold medal for the singles figure skating competition, becoming the 7th American man to accomplish the feat. Now, Nathan was born in Utah to Chinese immigrants. Of course, Nathan Chen is ethnically Chinese. But do you think that his gold medal performance will mean a lot to the fans in China? Do you think that his gold medal performance will inspire millions of young boys in China to follow in his footsteps? Let's be honest, it won't, and this is exactly why Eileen Gu chose to represent China. Sure, haters are going to speculate that Eileen is only financially motivated by endorsement contracts, but you have to zoom out and see the big picture. And Eileen, as a fellow American, I want to commend you for your amazing performance. I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of your vision for uniting the United States and China, the two countries in the world that helped mold you into the young woman that you are today. Everyone, I've decided to make 2022 a year of learning and growth, and I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for anyone who wants to develop new skills. One of my biggest goals for 2022 is to improve as a YouTuber, and the first course that I enrolled in with Skillshare was YouTube Success, Script, Shoot, and Edit with MKBHD. Marquise Brownlee is a YouTube legend with over 15 million subscribers, and I know I can learn some new things to improve my own YouTube channel directly on his own Skillshare course. But what's your passion in life? Is it baking? Maybe it's music, maybe photography, or maybe you want to improve your business leadership skills, your marketing skills, or even learn a new language. There are thousands of courses to discover on Skillshare, and the first 1,000 people who click the link below will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you all for making it to this point in the video, and if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for spending some time with me here on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next video.